Good evening. My name is Lynn Bruno, and I am the co-president of the League of Women Voters, Glen Ellyn. It is my honor to welcome our two candidates and those of you watching to the League of Women Voters Democratic Candidates Forum for the United States House of Representatives District 6 seat. In this Democratic primary, there are two candidates on the ballot, Sean Casten and Joseph Ruzevich. Registered Democratic voters will cast a vote for one of these candidates in the March 17th primary election. The League of Women Voters Glen Ellyn extended an invitation to the two Republican candidates who are running for the seat, Nikki Conforti and Schuyler Duensing. Unfortunately, we received no response to that request from either of those candidates, and so as a result, we are unable to hold a Republican candidate forum for this race as we had hoped to do. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League works to increase understanding of the major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. And today, we're pleased to host this voter information event. It is our first candidate forum for the 2026 primary election. The format is virtual. We ask that candidates and viewers eliminate distractions and give the forum their undivided attention as they would for an in-person event. Our moderator this evening is Barb Lymans. Barb joined the League of Women Voters of Wheaton in 2014. She is a past League president and has served as voter service chair and on the Civic Education Committee. A former civics and psychology teacher, Barb currently co-chairs the League of Women Voters Illinois Task Force on Misdisinformation and the planning board for the League of Women Voters National Institute for Civic Discourse. Barb lives in West Chicago, and we're thrilled to have her moderate this forum.
Thank you, Lynn. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me to moderate tonight's Democratic Candidate Forum for Representative of the Illinois 6th Congressional District. I'd like to begin by reviewing some of the League ground rules for candidate forums. Both candidates have signed and returned the ground rules. These rules specify the format, time limits, and agreement to focus on policy and issues and not what the other candidate has done or not done. A forum is not a debate, and I will be responsible for enforcing the rules. The candidates will begin in alphabetical order with their opening statements. They will alternate the order in which they answer questions. After the question portion of the forum, each candidate will give a closing statement. Each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes for their opening statement, 1.5 minutes to respond to each question, and 1.5 minutes to make a closing statement. Their responses will be timed as you see on the screen. The questions have been gathered in advance from the public, and a panel of experienced members of the League of Women Voters has reviewed the questions submitted and carefully screened the question for appropriateness and to avoid duplications. This forum is being recorded, and the League does claim copyright ownership of the recording and transcript that is produced. The forum will be posted in its entirety on the League's website, social media platforms, and vote411.org. Finally, I do want to emphasize how grateful we are for these candidates who are not only willing to serve in office, but have agreed to be here tonight. Candidates, I'd like to welcome you to the screen. Please start your video and unmute. Welcome. Welcome to you both. Candidate Casten, you have 1.5 minutes for your opening statement.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I just so appreciate the League over my now 7 years in Congress, your consistent commitment to making sure that people vote, making sure that they're educated. It's how democracy works. I wish that wasn't so partisan, but I'm glad that you're doing it. As I've been thinking about, what I was going to say tonight, it really increasingly strikes me that the next term in Congress, if the polls are to be believed, is going to be an awful lot like my first term in Congress and really my first foray into politics. We just flipped the House at that time, as you remember, in 2019. Donald Trump was 2 years into the White House and had 2 years to go. And we had a, shall we say, recalcitrant Senate that wasn't doing very much. And as a freshman with no prior political experience, in spite of those odds, I came in, I wrote two bills pretty early on that put two separate $500 million tranches of money into clean energy deployment that actually passed the Senate and was signed into law by Donald Trump. Was appointed by Nancy Pelosi to the Climate Committee, where I ended up being one of 12 people to represent the entire United States in the climate conference in Madrid because Donald Trump had pulled out. Um, and I also became one of the first members who'd flipped a seat to call for initiating impeachment proceedings against the president, which of course we did twice. And I say all that because as we look to this next term, we are going to need people of character to stand up and fix what Donald Trump has broken. We're also going to need people of experience. I'm now more than halfway up the seniority ladder. I'm the vice chair of the ranking committee, and we're going to need people to guide us through since so many of my mentors have now retired. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Ruzevich, your minute and a half for an opening statement.
Well, thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for hosting this, and thank you to Representative Casten for joining. My name is Joey Ruzevich. I'm a software engineer with experience in machine learning research and mobile app development. I am a fighter, not a folder, and I am sick of the crisis that America is in right now, both economically and morally, and I believe that these issues are tied. We are constantly told that we do not have enough money to invest in healthcare, that we do not have enough money to invest in education, that we do not have enough money to invest in the average American individual. I am here to tell you that that is not true. We do have the money. We are simply wasting it on war. And we need somebody with a moral backbone who is able to stand up against an ongoing genocide to prevent our tax dollars from being sent to a murderous country. I am also very well poised to regulate the artificial intelligence and data center crisis that is coming down the pike, that is already here, and we are seeing tens of thousands of jobs going away. No other member of Congress has the technical understanding to be able to regulate this technology. I will do it because I have the understanding and the will to be able to do it. I have been a very hard worker for a very long time. I've worked for everything that I've been given, and we need a new class of representatives for this moment. It is an emergency situation, and we need somebody willing to vote to impeach Donald Trump on a regular basis, regardless of if it goes through or not, and who is willing to go against the Democratic Party when the leadership and the donors are preventing that progress. I will be that representative for you, and I hope to be able to explain that further in this forum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Ruzevich, we're going to have the first question go to you. Okay. And the question is this: how would you prioritize the challenges facing our country? You have a minute and a half.
So, out of all of the challenges, right now, I think what's most important is what's happening with ICE and the economy. We are seeing a cost of living crisis go through the roof. Housing is completely unaffordable. The American dream is slipping away from an entire generation. I would work to ban private equity from buying single family homes. I would break up monopolies under the existing antitrust laws, and I would write new antitrust laws specific to technology companies that are using old loopholes to get around it. I would also work to stop sending money to Israel to commit a genocide. I would stop allowing the Pentagon to fail an audit for 8 years now in a row to make sure that we know where our tax dollars are going. And with ICE, I would not vote for any funding of ICE whatsoever. We need to completely dissolve this agency. It cannot be reformed. It must be defunded fully. And I would also work against and speak out against, at the very least, the Democratic leadership, such as Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who are doing absolutely nothing to wield the power that Democrats hold right now in order to facilitate this defunding of such a honestly terroristic organization.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, you have a minute and a half. How would you prioritize the challenges facing our country?
So I think every race I've run before, I've said that my number one, two, and three issues are climate change, which is still the existential threat to our species. But increasingly this term, as I was telling my father recently, that the oath I took to the Constitution is becoming more important than the reason I came in here. Our Constitution is being attacked on a daily basis. It's being attacked by the president, who is violating, and his officers who are violating all Americans' constitutional rights. They're murdering people in Minneapolis, and they're being allowed to get away with it by a complacent Republican leadership in the House. And yes, if we have Democrats back in control, we can put checks on those things. We can do long overdue oversight. But I think we have to really start thinking about what sorts of things we can do to restore the checks and balances in the House. I've introduced legislation to expand the House, to expand the Senate, to try to make sure that we can get a government that more accurately reflects the will of the people. I've also introduced legislation to change the structure of the Supreme Court because Congress has the authority under Article 3 to change the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. There's no reason we should not be talking about limiting their appellate jurisdiction, limiting their funding, which Congress has the power of the purse. The 1925 Judges Act gave the Supreme Court the ability to set their docket. We can change those things. And if we start pushing back on those other branches, then we don't have to worry so much in the future about whether a president can get away with the crimes that he's doing without being checked by the other branches. So Congress, I think, has an important role in the next term to take the power back that's been taken from us by the Article 1 and
Thank you.
Article 2 and Article 3 branches.
Candidate Casten, please share with us what kind of oversight and accountability you believe federal immigration enforcement agents and operations should have, if any, and what Congress can do.
Well, I've been very clear, as we sit here, when we get back to Washington next week, I am entirely unclear on whether we're going to be able to fund DHS. What I've been very clear on is that I will not vote for any funding package that doesn't include provisions where ICE can no longer wear masks, has to identify themselves, cannot enter a home without a judicial warrant, has to be prosecuted for violations of the law, which would mean we can do that. We have to make some modifications in existing statute and to remove the $75 billion of additional funding, which was given to ICE in the big ugly bill that the Republicans passed. If we don't do all of those things, I'm not going to vote to support ICE. I don't know where the votes are going to be on that next week, but they're out of control at this point, and we need to check them.
Candidate Ruzevich, please share with us what kind of oversight and accountability you believe federal immigration enforcement agents and operations should have, if any, and what Congress can do.
Yes, I think this is the biggest difference with me is that I am not willing to mince words. I am going to say that ICE needs to be completely defunded and dissolved. This agency cannot be reformed. They have shown that no matter how many rules you write for them, they will not listen to them. They will not follow those rules. We can have the Democrats write all sorts of rules about not wearing masks, but what happens when they don't follow those rules? Where's the enforcement arm? They have showed their unwillingness to do this in the past, and I don't think writing more rules for an unruly agency is going to do anything. So I would say that if we really want to tackle immigration, illegal immigration in general, we must go after the business owners. We can have E-Verify and punish financially the business owners who are doing these things and who are employing illegal immigration in a way that does not affect the average citizens by having an organization terrorize neighborhoods, especially in Chicago, and in Lombard specifically, where ICE has been, which is in District 6. I've been to the protests outside of the hotels with ICE agents. This organization cannot be resolved. It must be defunded fully.
Thank you. The next question, Candidate Ruzevich. What are the key challenges facing democracy in the United States, and what would you do to address these issues?
The key challenges facing democracy right now is the enforcement, the lack of will from Congress to wield the power that they have. And I truly believe that the failures of the Democratic Party and the Democratic leadership over the last 10 years have allowed Trump to come back into office and do the things that he's doing to the Constitution. So the Congress needs to use their power of the purse in order to wield limit the ability of the president to do these things, especially when it comes to war powers, especially when it comes to tariffs, especially when it comes to ICE. The United States Congress does have a lot of power, and we must make sure that we use that power to defend this democracy. I would also say that money in politics is a big threat to democracy, and we need to shorten the window of which elections occur. We need to cap spending limits. We need to make sure that the people's voice is not drowned out by hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate PACs and foreign lobbies such as APAC and the affiliated PACs like DMFI or J Street. So we absolutely have a lot to do. And those are the things that I would say Congress has the absolute power to do. And if they are not doing it, the failure to deliver when Democrats are in office allows Republicans to have the power that they have now.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, what are the key challenges facing democracy in the United States, and what would you do to address these issues?
The longer I'm in this job, the more I'm struck by the fact that the limitations of our democracy were built into it by our founders. First election we could ever have in this country, only 6% of Americans had the right to vote. Those were the people who voted to ratify the Constitution, the amendments to the Constitution. Over time, we granted women the right to vote, African Americans the right to vote, eventually Native Americans the right to vote. We still don't think people are sophisticated enough to vote for president, though, because of the Electoral College. It took a long time for us to think people were sophisticated to vote for the Senate, and we still have massive misrepresentation in both the House and the Senate that overrepresents rural America. And what that creates is the situation where everybody believes that the government is responsive to public will, and yet the structure of the government overrepresents rural land at the expense of people. We've introduced bills to expand the House in ways that would expand that protection, to expand the Senate, as I mentioned earlier, to claw back some of the jurisdiction from the Supreme Court. Because every time in our history we have made advances in becoming more democratic, there has been a pushback, and we're in one of those pushback moments right now. I think the big challenge that we face that's unique to this era is that particularly in the social media algorithmic era, we have defined ourselves by our differences. And if we stay down that route, the only solution to more division is division. And we have to make sure that we keep reminding people that we are Americans in the first instance, that we are all in this together, and that while our institutions need repair, we don't want to destroy them.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, what changes, if any, would you support to improve access and affordability of healthcare?
You know, we made such great success when we had Democratic control in expanding the Affordable Care Act. The failure of the Affordable Care Act was always that it didn't get to totally universal care. There are still gaps of people who couldn't afford coverage. And when we expanded those ACA subsidies, we brought another 20 million people into the healthcare network. When we repealed the ban that was imposed by George Bush on Medicare negotiating pharmaceutical prices, we started to bring that down. And of course, all of those changes were repealed when the Republicans took over, and we're going to see an awful lot of people lose their health care. We need to get those back, but we really should have done, I still curse Joe Lieberman's name, we would have had a full public option in the Affordable Care Act that would come in, and we would have gotten to the kind of universal health coverage that made sure everybody had coverage. There's a lot of different ways to skin the universal coverage cat. I personally am partial to approaches that make sure that you still have competitive discipline in the system. What we've seen every time we have relied on a single government payer is it just attracts lobbyists like flypaper attracts flies. You know, the reason why Medicare doesn't cover vision, doesn't cover dental, all the calls we get from people is because it's been lobbied out of it. The reason why Medicare didn't have the ability to negotiate drug prices is because it's been lobbied out of it. If we maintain competitive alternative providers that people can opt into, we keep everybody in the system honest, and there's models, particularly in some of the Central Northern European countries, that have worked. And if we implemented those, would cut our healthcare costs by at least half and improve the quality of care.
Thank you. Candidate Ruzevich, what changes, if any, would you support to improve access and affordability to healthcare?
I would withhold my vote for Speaker of the House when I get into Congress to demand a floor vote on Medicare for all. This country needs universal health care. No more baby steps, no more incrementalism, universal health care. Period. End of story. 550,000 American families go bankrupt every year because of medical bills. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the nation, or in the history of the world, and we still pay more and get worse quality care for that money. So there is no alternative other than a universal health care program. And the way that we would do that is get everybody on record as to where they stand for Medicare for all. And then we have to start challenging them. We have to start saying, if you do not support Medicare for all, if you do not support universal health care, which the vast majority of the country supports, by the way, we will go after you in the primaries and make sure that a real progressive gets into office, because it has been far too long. The Democrats have had control many, many times before, and they passed a watered down Republican bill for healthcare and never got it better. So it's absolutely great that the ACA was the first step. But that's the problem with the current leadership and the current Democrats in office, is they think just the first step is okay and that's enough. That's not enough. We need universal health care.
Thank you. This question is going to begin with you, candidate Ruzevich. What steps would you take to address rising costs of housing, healthcare, and education for Illinois families?
Sure. So, like I said, universal health care, Medicare for all, that addresses the healthcare costs. As far as housing goes, we need to ban private equity from buying single family homes. That's it. There is no reason that we should have corporate landlords owning the entirety of the housing market and making us a permanent renter class. We also need to have a massive investment in new housing. We are roughly 3 million houses short of what we need. The population continues to increase, and housing prices continue to soar. So we need some type of relief, especially for first-time home buyers and for people who are being priced out of their home due to property tax increases. This is a very easy call. As far as the rest of the living cost of living crisis goes, we have to break up monopolies. We have a massive consolidation of wealth and power in this country across multiple markets. We have 4 major meat packers in America. That's it. We have 5 major auto manufacturers. We have a handful of tech companies running the entirety of software and hardware. We have to break up monopolies to inject competition into the market that will naturally lower prices and increase innovation. Finally, what I'll say is that we must require data centers to build their own energy infrastructure. It is not enough for them to pay a higher price in electricity. They're still plugged into the grid, taking from the supply that we are all paying into. They have to build their own energy infrastructure, and it must be clean energy.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, what steps would you take to address rising costs of housing, healthcare, and education for Illinois families?
So I'd mentioned healthcare before, so I'll leave that there. On the housing side, the solution really has to be through the supply side of the equation, and a lot of that gets into local and state zoning rules. There's the practical reality that the majority of Americans' wealth is tied up in their home. If we passed a magic wand and made housing costs go down, you'd have riots in the street because people's retirements is tied up in their house. We can fix that through the supply side by making more houses available. We can certainly fix that by helping people get into first homes and remembering that so much of the wealth that was built, particularly among white Americans, was because of massively subsidized housing loans made after World War II that were done by FDR that intentionally and by design excluded African American communities. And I think there are opportunities that we can have, should have, to look at those communities that have been left behind and expand those options. One of the ideas that I don't have legislation on this, but we're kicking it around, is right now we give banks community obligations to provide additional lending to people in their community. And yet, if you're over indebted in the community, what you really need is equity, not more debt. And so, can we restructure the CRA, the community, the local act that helps banks fund, to say, why don't we give you even more points if you help people get under PMI, come up with a down payment for their home, and make the private sector a partner in ways that we helped subsidize housing before. And I think we've ran out of time for education.
Thank you. You did. Thank you.
There we go.
Candidate Casten, next question. What is your position on federal voting rights legislation, and how would you work to ensure all eligible Illinois voters can access the ballot?
Well, so the good news is we live in Illinois, where we do a much better job of letting people vote. And notwithstanding what President Trump says, the Constitution is very clear that states control the means of elections and how to make sure people vote. And we have to make sure we zealously defend that against some of the attacks that are coming from the Trump White House. I actually supported in my first term, and we didn't get it through, a proposal from Ayanna Pressley to lower the voting age to 16. And it was based on this fascinating analysis that was done that the lowest propensity voters are 18 to 24-year-olds, and the highest propensity voters are 50 to 60-year-old women. It's primarily because at that younger age cohort, you're usually living in a new place that you don't have roots to. When you're 16, you're probably living with a 50 to 65-year-old woman. And there's a lot of evidence that once you start voting, you tend to continue voting. So how do we help make sure that people get in the habit of voting early? Um, we have also got to restore the Voting Rights Act. That's going to take a lot of work, and the Supreme Court is not going to be our friend. They have gutted the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby versus Holder decision. Even as we sit here today, you will wait almost 10 times as long to vote if you are Black than if you are white. That is very intentional. And the Supreme Court, when John Roberts said we lived in a post-racial society, and then just 2 years later overturned the Alabama maps because he said, in fact, they were racially gerrymandered. I kind of wish he would have had the self-awareness to say that he got it wrong in Shelby versus Holder. But we need to find legislative ways to fix what the Supreme Court has done, and as I've said before, reassert our power as the Article 1 branch against the courts.
Thank you. Candidate Ruzevich, what is your position on federal voting rights legislation, and how would you work to ensure all eligible Illinois voters can access the ballot?
Yes, thank you. So first and foremost, we have to make Election Day a national holiday. It's ridiculous that it isn't. It's ridiculous that it's on a Tuesday. This is to prevent working class Americans from trying to get to the polls. We need to massively expand the number of voting locations, and we need to massively invest in individuals who are willing to help with the voting counts. I know there are a ton of volunteers that spend their precious time doing this work already, and I'm very thankful for the work that they do and the time that they sacrifice. But we have to start investing in elections to make sure that everybody has the access to a polling place, whether it's on Election Day or during early voting. I would also pass the Voting Rights Act. I would increase the strength of the Voting Rights Act to make sure that people do have access to the ballot box. And of course, we need to massively invest in places that are historically disenfranchised. Black, brown, Latino, Arab, Muslim, Asian, all of it. Those neighborhoods need to have way more polling places, way more outreach, and access to the voting box.
Thank you. Candidate Ruzevich, what environmental issues should Congress be addressing?
The first and foremost is data centers. This is affecting the entirety of the nation. They're popping up all around. I was actually at Naperville City Council recently, which is not in the district, but it's right next door. And I spoke there as a software engineer, as somebody who has worked on machine learning research in the past, to not only speak out against the environmental impact of the increase in electricity cost, but also how when these data centers move in, they are looking to go into existing factories that have existing infrastructure, such as transformers. And these are old pieces of technology. When those transformers fail or blow, they must use diesel generators running 24/7 that blankets the neighborhood in a thick fog. So we absolutely have to demand that they build their own green energy supply. I would also have a massive investment. I would pass landmark legislation that invests in green energy, wind, solar, geothermal, and nuclear. We must rely on the United States Navy's expertise, who has built and deployed what are called small modular reactors. They have deployed 1 to 2 small modular reactors on submarines and aircraft carriers for the past 70 years with a perfect safety record. We must lean on their expertise and the Army Corps of Engineers to start massively expanding the nuclear energy supply in this country.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, what environmental issues should Congress be addressing?
So this will come as no surprise, but climate change is the existential threat to our species. And the numbers, when you start going through them, are so depressing as to paralyze you with fear. But I think it's worth understanding them. Half of the CO2 that we have ever emitted as a species since the first upright man learned to make a fire has been emitted since 1995. The last time the atmosphere was at a level of CO2 in the atmosphere that was consistent with when our species stopped being nomadic and settled down in cities because rivers weren't moving and sea levels weren't rising was also 1995, when we were about 350 parts per million. The last time CO2 was as high as it is in the atmosphere right now, the sea levels were 8 meters higher. We have basically locked in 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050 as we sit here right now. That can paralyze you with fear, but the enormous opportunity we have is that every single technology we could deploy to lower CO2 emissions also lowers the cost of energy. Their challenge, the objection from the Trump administration, the objection from the Republicans is not because they are clean, but because they are cheap. There's no bigger threat to a coal plant than a wind turbine opening up next door. There's no bigger threat to a gas plant than a solar plant opening up next door. There's no bigger threat to gasoline than you get having access to an electric vehicle. Part of the reason in the IRA where we made sure that those tax credits were so big was so that everybody could afford those technologies. And myself and Mike Levin have introduced legislation to change the incentives in the energy system so that the energy producing industry can actually make money by lowering your cost of power instead of having this continuing conflict between the interests of
Th-
producers and consumers. If we align those,
Thank
we
you.
might just save our planet.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, what federal policies do you support to reduce gun violence while respecting constitutional rights?
The darn near all of them. I think we have completely bastardized our understanding of the Second Amendment. And so when people say, do you support the Second Amendment? Sure. I support the Second Amendment in spite of the ruling in Heller that says that the first 13 words are merely prefatory, and we can ignore that part about the well-regulated militia. When our founders wrote the Second Amendment, they understood what a militia meant. A militia was the thing that they said in the Constitution that only Congress has the power to summon and can only be summoned if there is a insurrection to enforce the laws of the United States or if there's a foreign invasion. They did that because we didn't have a standing army. The idea that we have now expanded that to say that you can stand your ground, that you can shoot someone just because they looked at you funny, that you could shoot someone because they're a nurse in Minneapolis trying to protect someone else is obscene. We have more guns per capita than any country in the world, and if we got rid of 50% of all the guns tomorrow, we would still have more guns per capita than all the guns in the world. Yes, that means universal background checks. Yes, that means bans on assault weapons. But if we don't have a serious conversation about how to honor what our founders understood in the Second Amendment and take weapons of war off the streets, we are still going to find ourselves every day with another school shooting, with another church shooting, with another mosque shooting, with another movie theater shooting. And I'm sick of the damn thoughts and prayers that we throw up every time without actually addressing the fundamental problem, which is we have too many damn guns.
Thank you. Candidate Ruzevich, what federal policies do you support to reduce gun violence while respecting constitutional rights?
Absolutely. This is something that I talk to moms about all of the time when I'm door knocking, and the fear that they have sending their children to school, wondering if they're going to have to be the ones that run to the school and try to save their children, how it happened in Uvalde. And of course, we've seen what happened with Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, a legally owning and carrying individual being shot and executed by the state because he was legally carrying. So first and foremost, the Second Amendment is there and we must respect it, but also there are common sense gun regulations that we can put into place, universal background checks, and passing the assault weapons ban again. There was a great study done that showed a massive decrease in the number of mass shootings in America when the assault weapons ban was in place, and then a massive increase once that ban was lifted and expired. So we have to put that back into place. We also need to look at red flag laws as well, because there are multiple instances where individuals have red flags thrown up because of their behavior, because of their speech online, that indicate that they are ready to make an attack. So those are the pieces of legislation that I would support going forward.
Thank you. I'm afraid this is going to be our last question, but we'll start with candidate Ruzevich. What principles guide your approach to U.S. involvement in international conflicts and humanitarian crises?
So I have a moral backbone, and when I see human beings suffering at the hands of the United States or the money or weapons that we send across the world, I believe that we are responsible. One of the main motivating factors for me to get in this race is that Illinois' District 6 contains the largest amount of Palestinian Americans in any congressional district in the entire United States. This is number one. And so I watched for 2.5 years, live streamed online, the most horrific instances of violence, starvation, and slaughter committed by Israel. And that was only possible with the votes of our members of Congress that continued to send those money and weapons, even though they knew what was going on. And so I would be guided by that moral compass. I would apply it across the board. And I would immediately sign on to Delia Ramirez's Block the Bombs Act that would prevent offensive weaponry from going to Israel. I would speak to my Palestinian constituents in the district. I would listen to them. I would not shun them. I would not push them out. I would not refuse to meet with them. And this principle is applied across the board. The genocide that's happening in Sudan, we see that the United States has the power to sanction the United Arab Emirates because they are the ones funding it. We see what's happening with Modi and how he's attacking Muslims in India. We see it all over the world. And so this is a very, very important issue, and we need to have an individual who has a moral backbone and will stand up for what is right.
Thank you. Candidate Casten, what principles guide your approach to U.S. involvement in international conflicts and humanitarian crises?
So I'm a firm believer that the United States is the only country in the world that has the moral authority and the credibility to be the advocate for human rights around the world. And that means we have to advocate for every human right, and it means we're going to get it wrong sometimes. But we have had broadly 75 years of peace in the world because the United States played that role. And we're now sitting here in a moment where Donald Trump just let the nuclear arms treaty expire, and we have a lot of uncertainty about what that means. It is very clear that China is mobilizing, preparing, thinking about, Xi would like to have Taiwan. It's a high probability risk that's there. He's looking at what the United States did in Venezuela and wondering how it can get there. I think when we have been at our best in America is when we have treated our partners in other countries with the wisdom of Frederick Douglass, who said that the best friend of a nation is he who most faithfully rebukes her for her sins, and he her worst enemy who seeks to excuse, palliate, or defend under the specious garb of patriotism. That means making sure that we allow other countries to honor their borders. So when you are attacked and invaded, we will support you to make sure that that invasion doesn't stand. But also means that there's accountability for when we go and provide that aid. That's a balance. There is no place on earth where there is some population of people who we think of as the good guy who was not the bad guy at some prior point. And looking at history is a hard way to judge moral authority. But we can look at where it is now and say, how do we preserve that rule of law? And I'm very
Thank you.
nervous in the Trump administration that we are still seen as that agent.
I'm afraid your time has elapsed. And I'm afraid our time together has elapsed. So, gentlemen, we'll begin closing statements with candidate Casten, and you have 1.5 minutes.
Well, I just would, I'd close again just by thanking the League so much. Democracy has always been a really dangerous idea. And James Madison had this line that he said, no government can depend on the virtue of the people of its rulers. And so we are forced to depend on the virtue of the people who select them. That is a big bet. It's a bet that's lasted for 250 years. We don't always get it right. But when I travel around, when I have the luxury of representing the United States from the Middle East to Europe and lots of places in between, what I'm consistently amazed about is that the rest of the world is in awe of the United States. And it's not because they're in awe of our leaders. It's because they're in awe of the character of the American people, because the stresses that we have faced from the Civil War to the Civil Rights era, and indeed to the moment we're in right now, is that the character of the American people has ultimately fixed it. And I say that with genuine thanks to what you're doing here and what the League is doing around the world. Because if we give up on this idea, we're going to lose. As long as we stay committed to the idea that everybody's got to vote, that democracy is a participatory sport, and that when you go into that voting booth, you are fully informed on the issues, we're going to get through. If we have to depend on 537 people in Washington to solve this, we're torched. If we can depend on 330 Americans exercising that virtue, I have great confidence that there's a lot more love and decency out here than there is hatred. So thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Ruzevich, your 1.5 minute closing statement.
Well, thank you very much to the League of Women Voters. I am very grateful for you putting on this forum and all of the work that you do. To the voters out there, I would say that this moment in time is existential. We cannot rely on the standard legislator to be in office and continue the baby steps that we have seen in the past. We need somebody who is a fighter, not a folder. We need a real progressive, especially in a district like District 6, which is a solidly blue district, +7 on the Democratic Index score. This is an opportunity to vote somebody in who's going to take big swings and who's going to deliver on those big swings. Whether it's artificial intelligence regulation, whether it's universal health care, whether it's having a moral backbone and preventing more money and weapons from going to Israel committing this genocide, I will be your voice. I will host regular town halls in person. I will make sure that your concerns are listened to, and I will do what is necessary to deliver on the promises. I will not give you pontifications about the founding fathers. I will deliver on the promises that I make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of the community, I want to thank you, both of you, for being here today and this evening and sharing your thoughts, policies, and positions. Gentlemen, your participation is now complete, and you may stop your videos.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you. Good night. Thank you to all those in attendance and who are willing to be watch in the future. Please remember to vote on or before March 17th, and we hope that you will inspire your family and friends to do the same. For nonpartisan election information and candidate information, please go to vote411.org, powered by the League of Women Voters, and visit the Glen Ellyn League website, lwvge.org, where you can find a recording of this and other candidate forums. And now I'll turn the program back to Lynn.
Good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening and share with you that registration for 2 upcoming forums is now available on our website at lwvge.org, both to be held on February 16th. The first forum is for 2 Democratic candidates running for the Illinois House District 42, and that will run from 7 until 8 o'clock. The 2 candidates are Margaret De La Rosa and Lynn LaPlante. Please be aware that it is the League of Women Voters policy to hold forums only for contested races. Since there is only one Republican candidate, Stephanie Trussell, running for the seat, there will not be a Republican forum. The second forum begins at 8 o'clock that same evening and runs until 9. That forum is for a 4-year term for the DuPage County Board District 4, and the Democratic candidates are Paula McGowan and Syed Hussein. Again, there is only one Republican candidate, Grant Ecoff, running, so there will not be a Republican forum for this seat. That concludes this evening's event. Thank you all for attending. I hope to host you all on February 16th. Have a good night.